If you had told me 5 years ago that my name would be etched into a tombstone while my heart was still beating, I would have laughed and poured you a drink. But now I sit here, alive in every sense, except to the woman I loved. To her, I've been gone for years. Dead, buried, mourned, and apparently replaced. My name is Emory Langston. Not a name that rings bells. I never wanted it to. I lived quietly, worked hard, and stayed loyal to the woman I married 12 years ago. Her name was Delaney. A kindergarten teacher with a voice soft as a spring wind and a smile that could melt asphalt in July. I used to believe the sun rose differently when it touched her face. God, I was a fool. What happened to me started with a simple business trip. I worked in marine systems, spent my time inspecting coastal rigs. I took a flight to British Columbia for a last-minute evaluation. The plane went down in the mountains. Fire, ice, metal, the whole damn thing. I was the only one pulled from the wreckage alive, and even that felt temporary. I spent 8 months in a rural hospital, shattered bones, speech gone, no identification. By the time I could mutter my own name again, the world had already buried me. I wasn't declared missing. I was declared dead. They held a funeral. I saw the photos later. My brother sent them anonymously after he found out I was still breathing. Delaney stood there in black silk, her head pressed against another man's shoulder. I recognized him. Mason Grant. My best man at our wedding. A guy who once toasted to a love that would outlast storms. I guess he meant the ones I didn't survive. But the real knife didn't come until 2 years after I came back. That was when I saw them in person, hand in hand, stepping out of the same chapel Delaney and I once visited on our anniversary trip to Idaho. They had just gotten married. She was wearing the same dress I gave her on our 10th. And I stood across the street with a face she didn't recognize. A name the world no longer remembered. But she would. She would remember me very soon. And so would he. I didn't confront them that day. I didn't scream or make a scene. I just stood there in the rain like some ghost wandering through the wrong decade, watching my wife kiss my best friend like they'd known each other their whole lives. Maybe they had. Maybe they'd just waited for the right excuse. I kept telling myself it didn't matter, that I was technically dead to them, that no one owed me anything. But lies don't dissolve the kind of betrayal that gets carved into your bones. The truth was, I couldn't understand how Delaney had moved on so easily. I had survived hell to get back to her, dragged my broken body through recovery, taught myself how to speak again, how to walk again. And while I struggled alone in silence, she had rebuilt her life in the arms of the one man I used to trust like blood. I booked a cheap motel room outside the city and spent the night staring at the ceiling, replaying everything I remembered about our last months together. The way she kissed me at the airport before my flight. The little notes she used to leave in my suitcase. The last message I ever got from her, come home safe. I can't sleep without you. Apparently, she'd found a way to sleep just fine. Over the next few weeks, I dug through everything I could find. Public marriage records. Social media posts. Old contacts. I created a fake account to join the local community page where their wedding photos had been shared. There she was, Delaney Langston Grant, smiling in front of the altar like the past had never happened. And the comments, that's what broke me. Such a beautiful story, two people who found each other after loss. She was so strong after losing Emory. So glad she's happy again. They deserve this. Strong? Happy? They made it sound like she'd clawed her way through heartbreak. But I knew her. Delaney never liked being alone. She needed someone to keep her center of gravity. And Mason? He was always circling her. Even when we were still together. I thought it was harmless. A crush. Admiration, maybe. But now I knew better. He hadn't stepped in to help her grieve, he'd just stepped into my life like it was waiting for him. But what cut deepest wasn't what I found online. It was what I heard in person. I drove back to our hometown a month later. Sat in the corner of a little diner we used to go to. I didn't recognize the waitress, but she recognized her. Delaney and Mason come in here every Sunday, she said. Real sweet couple. I asked what people around town thought about her late husband, me. The waitress hesitated. Wasn't he the guy who faked his own death or something? She asked, lowering her voice. Delaney said he was troubled. Paranoid. Ran off into the woods during a work trip and was never found. It was real tragic. That moment hit harder than the crash. She hadn't just buried me, she'd rewritten me. Turned me into a ghost with a bad reputation. A man no one missed because he'd supposedly lost his mind. That way, no one would ask questions when she moved on. No one would wonder why her grief looked more like freedom. I sat there in that booth, hands clenched so tightly my knuckles turned white, and realized something very clear. She didn't just let me go. She erased me. But the one mistake she made, the one thing she could never undo, was that I was still here. And I wasn't done. 2 days after hearing the waitress call me a paranoid runaway, I found myself parked in front of my old house. The same small white colonial with green shutters and a dented mailbox I'd fixed a dozen times. Someone had replaced the front porch light. There were flower pots on the steps brighter than anything Delaney ever used to bother with. And in the driveway? His truck. Mason's ridiculous oversized pickup. Still loud. Still spotless. Still parked in the spot that used to be mine. I didn't go to the door. That would have been easy. Too easy. And I wasn't after a confrontation. Not yet. Instead, I left an envelope in the mailbox. No name, no message. Just one photograph inside me. Alive. Sitting in a park in Montana 3 months ago holding a newspaper with the date clearly visible. I'd asked a stranger to take the picture when I first started planning this return. I figured I'd need proof, and now it had a purpose. I watched from the end of the street as the mailman came, then left. A few hours later, the porch light came on. The door opened. And there she was. Delaney. She looked older. Not worse, just different. Like the shine had been replaced by something colder. Her hair was longer now, tied back. She wore one of those soft gray sweaters she used to steal from me when it got too chilly in the house. I could still see traces of the woman I loved in the way she reached absent-mindedly for the railing with one hand, balancing a glass of wine in the other. When she pulled the envelope from the mailbox and opened it, I watched her entire body freeze. She stared at the photo for nearly a full minute before her head turned left, then right, scanning the street. My heart was pounding. Not out of fear, but adrenaline. For the first time in years, I felt like I wasn't the one in the ground. She turned and rushed back inside. 10 minutes later, Mason came storming out. He looked around, his expression hard, his fists clenched like a man preparing for a fight with something he couldn't see. I stayed hidden. He stood on the porch for another minute before going back in, slamming the door behind him. That's when I knew something for sure. She hadn't told him. He had no idea I was alive. Which led to the next question: how much did he actually know about what happened to me? The following morning, I did something I never thought I'd do. I called my brother, Weston. He was the only one who knew I'd made it. I hadn't told him the whole story, only that I wasn't ready to come back yet. He'd respected that, mostly because he hated drama and partly because he never really liked Delaney to begin with. When I told him about the envelope, he said something that stuck with me. Maybe it's time to stop playing ghost. Maybe it's time you find out why they buried you so fast. I hung up and started digging. I spent 2 days driving between courthouses, records offices, banks. All under a false name with forged ID. The irony was, being legally dead made it surprisingly easy to be invisible. But it also meant I could access everything that had been left behind when my death certificate was signed. And that's when I found it. A closed bank account in my name terminated just 2 days after my funeral. The balance? $278,000. It was the money from the sale of my boat repair business. Delaney had signed off on the transaction using a power of attorney dated 3 days before I boarded that doomed flight. 3 days. Which meant she either had a crystal ball or she'd planned for me not to come back. I stared at the printout, hands trembling. It was the first real evidence I had that this wasn't just grief and moving on. It was control. Money. Maybe even motive. And then I found something else, something worse. Buried in an old safety deposit box registered to our joint name was a copy of my original life insurance policy. It had been changed 6 months before the crash. New beneficiary, Delaney Langston. Secondary beneficiary? Mason Grant. That's when the cold truth started sinking in. This wasn't just betrayal. This was premeditated. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the driver's seat of my rented car in a 24-hour grocery store parking lot, engine off, headlights dark. I stared at the documents over and over, the power of attorney dated just before the crash, the account closure, the payout records, the amended life insurance policy. All of it pointed to one conclusion, and it wasn't just betrayal. It was orchestration. Someone had planned for me to disappear. Not just vanish, be erased. Forgotten. Buried. Delaney's signature was on every page. It made my stomach turn. I had trusted her with everything, my life, my business, my heart. And now the paper trail she left behind read like a blueprint for quiet murder. She hadn't needed blood on her hands. All she needed was the ocean, a crash, and the right paperwork. And I had given her all of it. I needed answers. Not assumptions, not theories, proof. I had been half dead when they last saw me, but now I had clarity. I was alive and I had nothing left to lose. The next morning I drove to the house again. This time I parked a few blocks away and walked. The neighborhood looked the same, tree-lined streets, kids playing basketball in driveways, the faint smell of fresh mulch in the air. But the house had changed. It was no longer mine, even though everything about it had once been a reflection of me. The flagstone walkway I laid down by hand. The shutters I painted before our 5th anniversary. Now it was dressed in new furniture, unfamiliar color palettes, and a layer of lies too thick to scrub away. I knocked on the door with my baseball cap pulled low, voice disguised just enough. Mason answered. He looked older. Not in a bad way, he had the comfortable bulk of a man who had settled into domestic life. Gray in his beard, wedding band on his finger. The image of stability. I asked him if he remembered Emory Langston. His expression didn't change. Of course I do, he said without hesitation. He was my best friend. That burned. Strange, I said. Because his death certificate has your name all over the financials. His eyes narrowed. What exactly are you saying? Nothing, I said. Just thought you'd want to know that someone's been asking questions. Before he could respond, I turned and walked back toward the street. I didn't want to spook him too hard. Not yet. I just wanted to see his face when the seeds were planted. And I saw exactly what I was looking for, uncertainty. Not fear. Not guilt. Uncertainty. Which told me something I wasn't expecting. Mason didn't know the whole truth. Later that day, I went to visit the last person who might have been able to tell me what happened during those days after the crash, my old coworker, Ronnie. He was one of the few people who knew the inside of my business before I sold it, and he'd been close enough to Delaney to pick up on anything unusual. He lived about an hour out of town in a small cabin where he'd retired early after a payout from a rig injury. Ronnie opened the door wearing the same flannel he probably wore to my bachelor party. His eyes went wide like he was seeing a ghost. For a moment I thought he might slam the door. Instead, he hugged me. You're supposed to be dead, he said, his voice shaking. I know, I said. Got a minute? He poured us coffee and we sat on his back porch, the Oregon fog rolling in like smoke between the trees. I told him everything, the crash, the hospital, the recovery, the discovery. I watched his face twist and shift as the details landed one by one. Then I asked the one question I'd been avoiding. Did you ever think Delaney wanted me gone? He hesitated. That was all I needed. She changed after you left, he finally said. Cold. Focused. Like she was on a timer. Mason was always around too. Way too much. I figured she was just grieving, but... One night she came to the shop, Ronnie said. Asked me if I knew how to legally dissolve a business fast. Told me you'd signed the paperwork already. It didn't feel right. You never let her near the numbers. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She said you'd been unstable, he added, looking down into his mug. That you'd been making threats. Talking crazy. She said if anything happened to you, she needed protection. Protection. From me. She had built a whole narrative. The grieving wife who tried to save her unstable husband who was left alone when he vanished. A story so clean, no one thought to challenge it. Not even my friends. Ronnie leaned forward and said something that cut through the morning air like a razor. You think she loved him the whole time? I didn't answer. Because the truth is, I did. And worse, I think she loved him even more once I was gone. But now I was back. And this time I was going to make sure no one rewrote the story but me. It was a Thursday afternoon when I finally stood face to face with Delaney. No warning. No disguise. No barrier. Just her and me, two people bound by a past that only one of us had been trying to forget. But first, I had to get her to look me in the eye. I found out she was volunteering at the Historical Society's annual fundraiser gala, something she used to drag me to back when we were married, and I used to grumble through it just to see her laugh in those long dresses she never wore anywhere else. Now she was hosting it with Mason. They were listed as event co-chairs on the flyer, with a posed smiling photo I could barely stomach. But that night, I walked into that same ballroom wearing a rented suit and a name tag that read Evan Masters. No one questioned me. That's the thing about dressing the part, people see what they expect. She was standing near the bar, mid-laugh, holding a glass of white wine and wearing a navy blue dress I'd bought her for our 7th anniversary. I remember because she returned it the next day, said it was too formal, not her style. And yet there she was, years later, wearing it like it was second skin. I don't know what stung more, seeing her alive and radiant or realizing she looked genuinely happy. Until she saw me. It happened in slow motion. Her head turned, her lips still curled in a polite smile meant for someone else, but her eyes locked onto mine and didn't move. I watched the blood drain from her face. Her glass tilted slightly, but she didn't drop it. Delaney was always composed, too composed. But in that moment, she couldn't hide it. Her mouth parted like she was about to speak, but she didn't. Her fingers tightened on the stem of the glass. Her eyes welled, not with tears, but with panic. I gave her a small nod. Nothing more. No words. Just enough to confirm that what she was seeing was real. She turned and walked fast. Not toward Mason. Not toward anyone she could trust. Straight to the exit. I followed. Outside, the air was cooler than it should have been for spring. She stood beneath the yellow light of the overhang, her back to me, shoulders rising and falling like she'd run a marathon. "Delaney," I said quietly. She turned. And for a split second, I saw something flash across her face that I'd never seen before. Not during arguments, not in our worst moments, not even when she thought I was dead. Fear. Her voice came out hoarse. "You're not supposed to be here." "That's the thing about ghosts," I said. "They show up when you least want them to." She stepped closer, staring at me like she needed to physically confirm what her eyes were refusing to believe. She reached out, hesitated, then pulled her hand back. "I buried you," she said, and her voice cracked. "No," I said. "You replaced me. You wrote a new story, Delaney. One where I vanished because I was unstable. One where you were the strong, heartbroken widow and Mason was your savior. I thought you were gone." I pulled a folded copy of the power of attorney document from my pocket and handed it to her. "This is dated before the crash. 3 days before, you signed away everything in my name. My business. My accounts. You knew, Delaney." She shook her head. Did you plan it? Or were you just waiting for the right accident to come along?" Her eyes narrowed, some of that old fire returning. "You don't know what it was like. The months without you. The grief, You didn't wait months," I snapped. "You sold the business 2 weeks after my memorial. You closed the joint accounts days later. You cashed in on a life insurance policy I never authorized. And you married Mason." Silence fell between us like a wall collapsing. She was shaking now, not from the cold, but from something deeper. "He didn't know," she finally said, voice trembling. "Mason didn't know about the documents. I told him they came later. That they were settled legally. And the money?" "Split," she admitted. "Half went to paying off Mason's debts. The rest, it's gone." My chest tightened. "You planned this?" "No," she said. "I didn't. But I didn't stop it either." She looked away, staring at nothing. "The day they told me you were dead, something inside me went quiet. I didn't ask questions. I didn't look harder. I let them bury an empty box and I moved on. It was easier than facing the guilt." "What guilt?" Her eyes met mine again. "That I'd already fallen in love with him before you left." There it was. The truth, raw and heavy and cruel. Not just that she moved on. Not just that she remarried. But that she had already left me long before my plane hit the mountainside. I couldn't say anything. My body was frozen, not by temperature, but by the kind of numbness that only comes when your worst suspicion isn't a theory anymore, it's a fact. "I never wanted you dead," she whispered. "But you didn't want me back either." Her lips parted, but she didn't answer. I turned and walked away before I could hear whatever excuse she had waiting in her throat. Because there was nothing left for me in her voice. Nothing left in her eyes. Whatever we'd been, whatever I'd fought to survive for, it had already died long before I ever did. The next morning, Delaney showed up at my motel. I don't know how she found me. Maybe she'd followed me the night before, or maybe she'd gone home and stared at that envelope long enough to realize running wouldn't be enough this time. Either way, there she was, standing outside my door in a long coat, eyes red, hair undone, like she hadn't slept a second. I didn't invite her in. I just opened the door and waited. "I need to explain," she said. I stepped back without saying a word. She walked in slowly, glancing at the stack of printouts and records on the table. Her eyes fell on the photograph, the one I'd left in the mailbox. The one where I held a newspaper with the date just weeks old. Her hands shook as she reached for it, but she didn't pick it up. "I knew you weren't the same after the accident," she said quietly. "I knew you wouldn't let this go." "That's what separates me from you," I replied. "I never let go of the people I love." She looked at me, the edge of guilt in her eyes now twisting into something more desperate. "You don't understand what it was like. After they told me you were dead." I broke. "But Mason was there. Every day. Every call. Every step. He didn't pressure me. He didn't even mention love. Not at first." I folded my arms. "But when did he mention the insurance money?" Her face dropped. "I didn't kill you," she said. "I didn't plan it. I just saw the opening and I let it happen. That's the worst thing I can admit." "No," I said. "The worst thing you did was erase me. Rewrite me as someone who deserved to disappear. And then pretend you'd survived the pain." "I did survive," she snapped. "You don't know what it's like to bury someone who used to be your whole life and wake up the next morning in silence. And yet you filled that silence fast, didn't you?" The argument escalated until she broke. Her voice cracked mid-sentence and she sank into the only chair by the window. I'd never seen her like that. She wasn't hysterical, Delaney never was. But for the first time she didn't look polished or in control. She looked like a woman who had finally run out of versions of the story to hide behind. I didn't think I'd ever see you again, she said after a long silence. And when I did, I wasn't sure if you came back to haunt me or destroy me. Neither, I said. I came back because I wasn't done living. She wiped her eyes, then stared straight ahead. So what happens now? And for the first time I told her the truth. That's not your decision anymore. She left without another word. That same day I filed the legal paperwork to challenge my own death certificate. It wasn't as complicated as I expected. I had documentation, records, recovery details, and now formal evidence of identity from my brother and 2 living witnesses. It would take time, but soon enough Emory Langston would be legally alive again. I didn't care about the house. I didn't want the money back, but I wanted the truth to exist again. I wanted the paper trail to reflect what had really happened, that I had lived through something impossible and the people who should have welcomed me back had tried to bury me instead. 3 days later I got a text from Weston, my brother. You made the news. He sent me a link. Local paper. Front page. Presumed dead man files to reverse death declaration. Wife married best friend. Financials under review. They didn't use our full names, but anyone who knew us wouldn't have to guess. The story spread faster than I expected. I had no intention of making it public, but once I filed that paperwork it became part of the record. I had become the center of a story no one believed until the evidence said otherwise. Delaney went silent. Mason didn't. He came to find me. It was late. I heard the banging on the motel door before I even reached the handle. When I opened it, he was standing there, eyes wide, face tight, like he'd aged 10 years in one night. You're alive, he said, almost in disbelief. You're really alive? I am, I said. And you married my wife. Congratulations. She said you were gone. That she'd seen the body. I laughed. There was no body. There never was. He shook his head. I didn't know. I swear to God, Emory, I didn't know anything until she started talking about moving the money. But you didn't ask, did you? I said. You didn't ask how a grieving widow knew exactly where every document was. You didn't ask why she was so ready to rebuild her life with you. Because deep down you wanted the story to be true. He stood there in silence. Go home, Mason, I said. Tell your wife the man she tried to forget is back. And this time I'm not going away quietly. The news didn't stop spreading. Within a week, local papers picked it up, then regional outlets. I started seeing headlines that read more like fiction than fact. Resurrected husband returns after years, dead wife married best friend, he was buried. Now he's back. It was surreal. Strangers were sending me emails. Reporters were calling. I even had one guy message me asking if he could option the story for a podcast series. I ignored all of them. I wasn't interested in fame. I just wanted the truth to stand somewhere other than my own chest. For once, I wanted the world to believe what had happened to me because no one had believed me when it actually mattered. The court hearing to reverse my death certificate was set for 2 weeks later. That alone stirred enough legal dust to rattle everyone involved. But what I didn't expect was how fast the pressure would begin to crush the 2 people who had built their new life on top of my grave. Delaney and Mason had always appeared polished, picture-perfect to the outside world. She was a community leader, a teacher. He ran a contracting company, sponsored charity events. They smiled at every neighborhood gathering, posed for pictures, hosted dinner parties. Their marriage was a carefully curated illusion. And I was the crack in the glass. On the morning of the 3rd day after the headlines hit, I parked a block away from their house and just watched. Cars passed, joggers moved down the sidewalks, dogs barked in backyards. But the house? Still. Curtains drawn. Porch untouched. That's when a man stepped onto their front lawn. Not Mason. A sheriff's deputy. He taped a document to their door. Legal papers. Summons. I waited until the cruiser pulled away, then approached the house slowly. I already knew what it was. The insurance company had launched a fraud investigation. The minute they saw my signature hadn't matched the amended policy and that the beneficiary had since married the alternate recipient, they opened a formal review. $500,000. That's how much she had claimed after my death. A quarter went toward the mortgage. Another chunk into Mason's failing business. The rest? Gone. Travel. Furniture. Private counseling. Lifestyle upgrades. According to the report Weston helped me acquire, they hadn't just spent it. They'd absorbed it into their identity. I didn't even knock. I just stood on the porch long enough to hear the fight happening inside. You told me he'd never come back. I thought he was dead, Mason. I thought we were free. You lied to me. For years. I didn't lie, I survived. It was all I needed to hear. I turned and left quietly. But Delaney didn't stay quiet. That night, she showed up at my motel again. Only this time, she wasn't fragile. She wasn't crying. She was furious. You had no right to do this, she hissed as she pushed into the room, her coat still wet from the rain. I had every right, I said calmly. It's my life you rewrote. You think this makes you the good guy? You think coming back from the dead makes you some kind of victim? She threw a folder on the bed. Inside were copies of letters, old ones. Ones I'd written from job sites, from airports. You stopped listening to me years before that flight. You were always somewhere else. Always more focused on the next project, the next contract. So you punished me by stealing my life? I didn't steal it. You abandoned it. That one landed. She'd always been good at shifting blame. But I didn't flinch. I may have drifted. I may have worked too much. But I never stopped loving you. And I sure as hell didn't deserve to be buried. Her voice dropped, suddenly softer. Do you really want to do this? You have no idea what this will turn into. I'm not afraid, I said. But I think you are. She didn't respond. Her eyes scanned the room like she couldn't stand to look directly at me. Then she asked something I didn't expect. What do you want? The question hung in the air. And honestly, I didn't know how to answer it yet. Because revenge was never the goal. Not really. I didn't want to hurt her. I didn't want to destroy their marriage. I just wanted to exist again. I wanted the truth to matter. I wanted to know that surviving meant something more than haunting the life I once lived. I want my name back, I said. And I want you to live with what you did. Not in secret. Not under a rug. In the open. For the rest of your life. She stared at me, then nodded once, slowly. And for the first time since she'd found out I was alive, she looked truly defeated. The next day, she filed for legal separation from Mason. The day after that, Mason closed his business and left town. And 2 days after that, my death certificate was revoked in court. The judge looked over the evidence, paused, and said something that stuck with me forever. In the eyes of the state, Mr. Langston, you are alive. But the real question, the one still echoing through every part of my mind, was this. Now that I had my life back, what the hell was I supposed to do with it? For weeks after the court officially reinstated me, I didn't speak to anyone outside of Weston. Not because I was angry. Not anymore. I was just exhausted. Coming back from the dead, it turns out, isn't just a legal process. It's emotional reconstruction. You're not just proving who you were to the world, you're learning who you've become after everything was taken. Delaney moved out of the house within a month. Sold it. Quietly. No farewell posts. No drama. She never tried to contact me again. Not a letter. Not a message. Not a single word. And I didn't chase her either. I had nothing left to say. That chapter was closed. For both of us. We weren't enemies, we were just two people who'd broken something so badly, it could never be rebuilt. Mason disappeared too. Rumor had it he moved south. His business folded. His name faded from community boards, event flyers, sponsorship plaques. He vanished like a shadow cast at sunset. Slowly, until there was nothing left. But me, I started over. The first thing I did was change cities. I left Oregon entirely and settled in a small town in northern Colorado. Quiet place. Good coffee. A lake you could walk around in under an hour. I found a fixer-upper house near the edge of town and spent my mornings working on it with my hands. Relearning the feel of lumber, the hum of tools, the rhythm of creation. I built things again. Not for profit. Not for clients. Just for me. I met people. Not romantically, at least not right away. I met neighbors, a retired teacher who baked pies and swore too much, a divorced father of two who fixed motorcycles and played blues guitar on his porch, a woman named Nadine who ran the bookstore and always remembered my coffee order before I even said it. We talked more and more, and one morning, she invited me to help her repaint the back room of the shop. By the time summer rolled in, we were walking the lake trail together most evenings. Not talking about our pasts, not rushing the future, just existing. Side by side, like two people learning how to breathe again. I never told her the whole story, not at first. But one evening, as we sat on a bench under a yellow sky, I told her the parts that mattered. That I had lost everything. That I had been gone longer than anyone should have allowed. And that I had come back not for vengeance, but for something simpler. To be seen. To matter. She looked at me for a long time, then said something I'll never forget. Sometimes you have to lose everything you thought you needed to find what you were meant to build. I smiled. For the first time in years, it wasn't bitter. Today, I live quietly. I run a local repair shop 3 days a week. I help folks fix things, furniture, bikes, fences. People trust me, not because of who I used to be, but because of how I show up now. Present, honest, steady. My name is Emory Langston, and I'm alive, not just legally, fully, finally. And for the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be.